Good morning, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Standards Procedure and Public Appointments Committee in 2025. We've received apologies from Ruth Maguire this morning, and then can I welcome Rona Mackay, who's attending as committee substitute, and also we've received apologies from Annie Wells, and I hope both recover soon. Our first agenda item is to take a decision on taking business in private in relation to item 6, which will be the consideration of the evidence that we hear from the Ethical Standards Commissioner, and to do so in private. Are members content to do that? I'm grateful. And our next item is indeed to hear from the Commissioner for Ethical Standards. Can I say good morning to Ian Bruce? And can I welcome you to this meeting? And happy to hand over to you for an introduction.
Great. Thank you, Convener and members of the committee, for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you about the work of my office today. I always appreciate these opportunities. They're not that frequent, so it's very helpful for me to be able to give you an update. I trust that you've reviewed our annual report and accounts and the briefing paper doubtless provided to you by the clerk to the committee for today's meeting, and that these will have given you an indication of the continuing progress that we've made as an office since I last gave evidence to the committee, and that was just in March of last year. As the committee will be aware from evidence I've provided previously, I do prefer to rely on external, independent validation of the work of my office. And the missing piece of the jigsaw potentially in that case is the Audit Scotland's report on the 2023-24 reporting year. That was published in November. I do hope the members have had an opportunity to review that. I have provided a copy to the clerks in case the details are of interest. Audit Scotland again concluded, or conducted rather, a wider scope review, and that was to provide assurance that our governance and other aspects of our work that had previously been of concern had been addressed. Their headline findings were that the Commissioner's Office operated within its budget, and that was the approved budget for that reporting year. Appropriate medium-term financial planning arrangements are in place, which demonstrate how services will continue to be delivered. A new strategic plan with clear objectives for improvement and a more strategic-looking senior management team are in place. Open and transparent governance arrangements are operating effectively. The vacancies that I was carrying have been filled, and increased capacity is making a difference to the work that we do. And complaints handling performance is improving, and positive developments have been implemented to tackle the waiting list. Additionally, they found good evidence that our arrangements demonstrate best value, as required by the ministerial guidance to accountable officers for public bodies and the Scottish Public Finance Manual. The auditors, for the second year running, I have to say, had no recommendations for me whatsoever. I was also provided with additional assurance by our internal auditors during the course of that year. They reviewed our cybersecurity arrangements and assessed our controls as substantial, and we've obtained Cyber Essentials Plus re-accreditation. Our financial arrangements were also rated as strong this year, and the auditors also reported positively on our work on implementing their prior recommendations. There's one final point that I'd like to raise with the committee today, and that's before moving to questions. We've successfully tendered now and identified a contractor called Leading Kind, and that's to assist the office with a refresh of Diversity Delivers. So that's the strategy for improving the diversity of Scotland's public body boards. I've already written to the responsible Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government to seek support with this initiative. The refresh of the strategy is well overdue. It was last published in 2008. And I'm particularly keen to have cross-party support with the refresh, which is why I raise it with the committee today. We're currently conducting research, and that's to produce what we are calling a State of the Nation report. And that's looking at diversity across the board on all public boards in Scotland. And that will be followed by our making practical recommendations for change. So support from the committee and also each of the parties with this work can only enhance it from my perspective. So I would welcome your views today as well as following our session together, and I do intend to write formally to the convener to seek that support following today's session. I genuinely would appreciate support from yourselves and your fellow MSPs with this work. I do think public appointments are often under the radar. These public bodies spend well over a third of all public money in Scotland, and it's important that the right people are in those roles in order to oversee that spend and the governance of those bodies. So I trust that this is of interest to the committee and its members, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
And thank you very much for that, Ian, and certainly we look forward to receiving your correspondence, and we'll continue to aid and assist as the responsibility of this committee has. I was going to kick off with a few questions and then throw you to the lion's den in the usual way. But just before starting the questions, I just wanted to pick up something that happened at the tail end of last year so that it is on the public record, and that's in relation to the Standards Commission for Scotland and the Section 10 direction on the outcome of investigations, because I think, as your opening words have said, in a very different position with regard to the Commission than has been in the past, and that's, you know, to be absolutely welcomed. Do you want to have the opportunity just to explain about what the Section 10 direction was, and more importantly, why the Standards Commission are happy for that now to fall by the wayside rather than be renewed?
Certainly. There were 3 sets of directions issued to effectively my predecessor by the Standards Commission related to concerns that I'm sure I don't need to repeat today. But in event, the last of them to lapse is the outcome direction. The outcome direction requires me to report on the outcome of all complaints that I investigate to the Standards Commission. It's been withdrawn very similarly to the other directions that I had on the basis that I've basically built it into the procedures that we operate as an office. And so they've concluded that because I've given that clear undertaking to continue to report to them whether the direction is in place or not, they're more than happy to let it lapse at the end of January.
That it's lapsing is an indication not it's just come to the end of its usefulness, but actually the purpose that sat behind it, in this case the reporting of each investigation, is now hardwired into the system so that it can't.
That's correct. As with the other directions, that's correct.
Clarification. And that leads me sort of to my first question, which is about public confidence, public trust, and indeed the public profile of you as Commissioner. And just to give you the opportunity to say how you think that is increasing, deepening, strengthening as time has gone on.
I think with our stakeholder organisations, public trust has definitely increased. I say that because I meet with stakeholders on a very regular basis, and I operate an open door policy. So that can be for public sessions like this, but equally private sessions or private conversations about the work of my office. And I think I've been able to demonstrate, I'll use the strategic plan consultation on that as an example. I think I've been able to demonstrate not only that I listen, but that I change policies and practices in response to legitimate and constructive concerns that are raised with me. So I consulted on the strategic plan for a 3-month period with an extensive range of stakeholders, and I had an awful lot of constructive commentary, including from this committee and members of this committee, about the ways in which I might adapt it in order to better meet the needs of stakeholders, including the public, and did so as a consequence. So, I made some quite significant changes to the plan following that consultation. I do feel that I can do more to increase public confidence. It's quite difficult to identify what the indicators for public confidence are, but it's apparent to me that people are, how does one put this, far more comfortable complaining, perhaps, than they were in the prior reporting year. We've seen an increase in complaints, so I think people feel if I do complain, then it's going to be taken seriously. If it has any merit, it's going to be investigated, and numbers, I think, are a good indicator of that. But I do feel I can do more in terms of public engagement. And in order to do so, I produced, alongside the strategic plan, a draft of a communication strategy. I also took constructive feedback on that and republished it in November. So the committee will be able to access that there. It identifies all our stakeholders, including members of the public, and all the activities that I've got planned for the next 4-year period in order to increase public confidence. And there are quite a range of those.
Thank you. And certainly the strategic plan 24 to 28 seems to very much underpin that route that you want to take in the route map. And you've explained how it was developed with stakeholders. It was interesting. I was just looking back at the evidence that you gave last year when the formulation of that strategic plan was still underway. One of the questions that a former committee member asked Stephen Kerr was about stakeholder surveys, and you said at that stage that you'd not surveyed stakeholders and it was not something that you were currently had in plan. But is it not the case that it was a sort of effectively a stakeholder survey that led to the design of the 24 to 28 plan?
I think that's fair comment. It's the way in which my office was going to operate for 4 years, and it was very, very important to me that I reached out to everyone who had a stake in my work in order to give them an opportunity to suggest ways in which I might improve things. So I do remember it was Mr. Kerr who made those constructive comments. And I built them into the strategic plan. So stakeholder surveys are now, absolutely included in there. They're included in my business plan. And he'd also suggested that, how does one put this? Perhaps the way in which my strategic objectives had been ordered suggested, an order of priority, and that perhaps I was inward gazing too much. So those were completely reordered, and public engagement and confidence rose to the top of what wasn't an ordered list. So both of his suggestions were incorporated into the face of the final plan.
That's very helpful, and certainly there seems to be substantial evidence that the values that are contained in the strategic document are very much underpinning both your values, your officers' values, but also the way that work is being progressed. And I just wonder whether 24, here we are at the start of 25, so it's still early days, but whether or not you have any sort of preliminary subjective or objective research findings that's come from that about the factors that are influencing the fluctuations and things like the public appointments round, the complaints. Are you starting to see that strategic document producing results, or through that strategic document are you starting to see results? Is probably a better way to put it.
Absolutely. So there are a whole range of objectives in there, but they're quite high level. What sits below that is a business plan, and I operate a rolling 2-year, a biennial business plan. And what that does is it sets out at a much more granular level the activities that the office needs to engage in order to meet those strategic objectives. I know my time here is limited, but we do publish our business plans online, as well as progress against them at the end of each financial year. So at the end of this financial year, the committee and anyone else with an interest for that matter will be able to see some of the things that we've established in order to meet those strategic objectives. Again, because time's limited, I might just pick one example. But one of our stakeholders was the convener of the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland, and they had some observations about the strategic plan in relation to our accessibility as an office. So what we've done since then is establish an accessibility working group which operates cross-office, and it's rolling out things like easy read material on our website. They're currently working on our BSL plan. And we're also working with other office holders on these types of activities as well. The investigations manual is now embedded. It's being reviewed quarterly and updated. We have a framework in place now that provides much more assurance on the quality of the work that we do. These are just a few examples of the specific things that we're doing in order to meet the higher level objectives in the strategic plan.
That's very helpful. I mean, one of the things that's commented on in the strategic plan, and I think certainly those of us that sit around this table and within in this organisation are aware of, is the increase in complaints relating to discourtesy, the definition, the disrespect that is frequently articulated, and obviously you see the consequences of that. I mean, what do you see going forward that you as the Commissioner, in collaboration both with the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government and the Standards Commission, about dealing with those specific aspects?
Yes. This is something I've also discussed with the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee, and I'm now in communication with COSLA with the same end in mind. You'll know my commitment to diversity. Almost 20 years I've been working in one iteration or another of this office, and I've always had an absolute commitment to diversity, not for its own sake, but for the difference it makes to governance. So yes, that applies to public bodies, but to be honest with you, I think it applies to the Parliament and to local authorities as well. I think each of these bodies should be reflective of the communities that they serve, and that where they are properly diverse, they're far better at decision making, policy formulation, and so on and so forth. Disrespectful and discourteous commentary and behaviour discourages people from entering public life, and I do mean all aspects of public life, and it's problematic. And I'm sorry to say that it's on the rise. So I agree that I have a responsibility in this space. Equally, I think we all do. I think I used a quote the last time, I'll use it again, but it was from Professor Adam Tompkins, who hadn't been found in breach of the code previously because he wasn't engaged in parliamentary duties, but he exceeded himself that he had played the man and not the ball. I think it's incumbent on me to make clear to everyone who comes into my office, and obviously the framework is set up so that this is done, that it's absolutely fine to be critical of another politician's policy position, but not to be personal about that. And that's what I have seen on occasion, and I'm sorry to say that it is on the rise. One of the simple things that I did do, so alongside the Standards Commission for Scotland, and this may have helped actually, but we wrote to the leaders of all the political parties in the run-up to the last election, and just reminded them of the provisions of the code and asked them to be very clear with their members that, notwithstanding the fact there's an election on the horizon, that criticism should be levelled at policy and not at people, not at political opponents, in order to undermine them. And we didn't see the spike that we'd anticipated in the run-up to that election, so perhaps there's hope.
Robust discourse without the discourtesy. You are, of course, aware of the new Scottish Parliament committee and the inquiry into SPCB-supported bodies, i.e. the commissioners, of which you fall as one of them. Would you like to make any sort of initial comments? I have a few questions about what has happened between the commissioners about supporting and sharing resource and the challenges. And you've mentioned the cybersecurity certification that you've got, which I think is much to the credit of those working on it. Is there any comments that you want to make first about that committee, about its inquiry, and indeed about the approach that you as a commissioner has taken with regard to the responsibility of what is public money at the end of the day?
Yeah, by all means. So I suppose I'm unusual in respect of this particular question, in as much as my office was established following the last review of office holders. If it weren't for that, then potentially you'd be speaking to 3 different commissioners instead of 1 today. Because so the function to investigate complaints about members of the Parliament was separate to the functions of the Public Appointments Commissioner, which was separate again to the functions of it was known as the Senior Investigating Officer, who investigated complaints about councillors and board members of public bodies. So all those 3 posts effectively merged in order to create mine following the last review. So I'm very familiar with reviews of this nature and what can come out of them. And I think, there was some synergy between these different posts. And I certainly feel that it's been beneficial to the public more generally that they have a single port of call when it comes to complaints about members, councillors, etc., and also members of public bodies. I think that kind of makes sense to members of the public. As far as my engagement with the Finance Committee and the current committee, I've already made my submission to the current committee. The deadline, I think, was today, but I put mine in a couple of days ago, and I'd be more than happy to provide a copy to the committee because all the details in there. In general terms, we already work as office holders together, and there are two sort of strands to that. So our corporate services team meets with the equivalents of all the other office holders on a quarterly basis. And that's so, this was before the Finance Committee started its work and before this new committee was established. It's called the Office Holder Shared Services Network, so it kind of does what it says on the tin. And it means that we're trying to reduce duplication of work. Give you an example. We have roughly 100 or so policies in a register, and they all need to be updated on a regular basis. And and they cover everything from IT security to HR matters, discipline, grievance, you name it. When we're doing those updates, it requires us to be across, what's going on in terms of case law, any changes in the legislation. And so because each of the different offices is doing bits of this work, by us pooling our resources and sharing the results of our research, it means that, for example, anyone who's tasked with HR-related work within an office holder's office has access to research that somebody else has done. So it reduces duplication of effort. We look at what we can do to tender jointly with others. And so that's going on at the sort of corporate services level. I also meet with my fellow office holders, and we have, very similar type discussions about, what potentially we can work on together. Most recently, I shared with them, the committee will be aware I did a workforce planning exercise, so that identified all of the activities that the office has to engage in order to acquit its statutory functions. So I'd stripped out extraneous information, but what it helped to do was identify what I was accountable for and what I was responsible for. Things I'm responsible for potentially, are delegated, but equally that could be a pooled service or a shared service or something that could be outsourced. So that's been shared with all my fellow office holders. So, it's organised in terms of things like finance, HR, IT, all these things are shown separately. And it gives us an opportunity to look collectively, particularly perhaps when vacancies arise, at whether or not, that there's scope for us to share more. So we are already in discussions about these things. In terms of what I said to the committee, in my submission, from my perspective, so there are some criteria for establishing new commissioners, and they'd asked whether or not there are additional ones. Given that it's come from the Finance Committee, I think the glaring omission from my perspective was affordability. Let's be honest, if there was an endless pot of money and you wanted to establish new advocacy bodies, then, it would be quite difficult to say, well, we're not going to do this. But if you look at it through an affordability lens, and also the other thing I'd suggested was either add value or best value, look at it through those two lenses additionally, it will help you to make decisions. But the other thing that I think is really, really important from my perspective is let's look at this from the perspective of a member of the public. So they don't need to know whether or not they've got a specific person who advocates for them. And remember, people are complex. Intersectionality is an issue. So, you may be a disabled person, you may be an older person, you might be both. And if you have an older person's commissioner, a disabled person's commissioner, who's advocating for you? Is it both of them? Where do you go if you've got an issue? So I don't think members of the public are necessarily concerned with that. What they want is to be able to identify very, very quickly who they go to if they're unhappy about a public service, or if they're unhappy about their local councillor. And they want to be able to make a complaint very easily. They want it to be properly addressed. They want people who've acted inappropriately or who haven't delivered the service appropriately to be held to account. And they want things to improve as a consequence. And I think that's a really good lens for all of us to be looking at this. I don't just mean that committee, I mean all of us together. Because if the current system isn't meeting the needs of the public in that way, we need to look at ways of ensuring that it does. And that's one of the other things I'm talking to my fellow office holders about, is whether or not there's scope for us to have some public portal where they don't need to do the research. They don't need to go and find out who deals with complaints of this nature. And the other thing that's particularly important, and doubtless we've all had experience of this and found it frustrating, they don't get sent from pillar to post.
Thank you very much. I have no intention of impinging on another committee's remit any further than that. So can I thank you? And I'm going to pass over to you, Rona Mackay, if that's all right, for the next set of questions.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Commissioner. I really like that idea of the public portal, by the way. I think that's a super idea. I wanted to ask you a wee bit about funding and governance. And I'm quite intrigued to know, and maybe you could expand on the reasons for you handing back £50,000 to the SPCB in February of this year. I'm sure they were very grateful, but could you maybe expand a wee bit on that?
Yes. So I'd explained earlier that I'd conducted that workforce planning exercise. It wasn't a huge increase in staffing numbers, but it was absolutely needed for the statutory functions that we need to equip. Within that bid, so it was for 7.4 staff total. That's headcount. Within that bid was a bid for a public appointments manager. That's a grade 4 officer, and their role was going to be to assist us with the diversity delivers refresh. So, and public money's tight, and I and my senior management team look every month at our current financial situation and projections for the year ends, and we look at ways of saving money all the time where we can. So even though that bid was accepted, in discussions with the public appointments team, we established, look, this doesn't need to be a sort of medium to longer term post. And if instead of basically filling this full-time post, and you'll understand that, once you've got someone in post, there's no redundancy policy in place. That's it. So in discussions with that public appointments team, we concluded that we could probably get the work done within a sort of year or two by going out and getting a contractor in to do the work, which I mentioned in my opening statement. So effectively, I've not filled a vacancy that I was carrying. I'm going to dedicate some money to the contractor, but there aren't on costs for that, so that saves money already. And so for the medium to longer term, clearly that saves quite a lot of money for the public purse. But we're still going to get this project over the line. So that's where the money came from.
Thank you. That sort of leads into my next question, which was going to be about that contractor leading kind, I think you said it was called. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's to assist with diversity policies. Is that correct?
So it's a strategy in order to improve on the diversity of public body boards. I have a statutory obligation to produce this strategy. It's included in the Public Appointments in Public Bodies, etc. Scotland Act 2003, Sunday name. So I've got that statutory obligation. The first one was produced in 2008. It's clearly well out of date. Currently, we work alongside Scottish Government and officials on an appointment round by appointment round basis to try and improve diversity on boards, and it's having an incremental impact over the years. So you'll have seen from the annual report, there are increases in the reflection of people with disabilities on boards, etc. And that's good, but we think we could do more and more faster by having regional and national activities So that's what the strategy is intended to do. It's to have a look at the state of the nation and devise some strategies, hopefully with your assistance, things that we could do better in order to improve diversity and to make that process quicker.
Okay. And is the contractor on a fixed term contract, or?
So it's not a fixed term contract per se, but what they have is deliverables, key deliverables, and a set budget. So there's no possibility of us having to pay them more than we've already agreed to pay them. They know that they've got to get the work done. We recognise that it might take like a year or two, but there's no more money. That's all the money.
Yeah. And you're overseeing that?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. That's interesting. That sort of answers that. And just to go on from that, the recent IT improvements, and I wonder if you could expand again on what effect that's going to have on efficiency and accessibility to your office, and are there any more ongoing IT operations plan?
Yes, again, that was included in the strategic plan. So one example, yes, we've got Cyber Essentials Plus reaccreditation, which is great. So that's about our safety and the safety of people who come into contact with us. But over and above that, we recently just migrated to SharePoint. Which wasn't straightforward, there were some niggles, but we'd planned for it really, really well, and it's operating really, really well. What does that mean? So in practical terms, it means we don't need to operate with servers anymore. It's all now cloud-based. We currently have office accommodation. It's not that expensive. The footprint is smaller than we actually would require if all the staff were working in the office, but we work in a hybrid way, so we've got quite a small footprint. But if we had to move to smaller accommodation still, because that potentially is on the cards, we could save money. We don't need to worry about a physical server anymore. Digitally, it's more secure than what we had in place previously. So that's an improvement. This week, we're moving to multi-factor authentication on the website. And that's to increase the safety of people who make complaints online. So that's another measure that we've taken, and we've got many more set out in the business plan.
And do you have an IT contractor that deals with all that for you? We
have a contractor, and we also have an ICT person in the office who's made a massive difference, because it was very, very difficult to move into the space that we felt that we needed to without that level of support.
And presumably they did a kind of assessment of how user-friendly it was for people. It's all very well being super technical, but if people don't understand it or can't access it, that's the problem. But I'm sure that would have gone into the evaluation.
Yeah. When the website was originally designed, it exceeded all the accessibility standards at that time. But last year we also did an accessibility audit and picked up any number of, because that's a moving target as well. Accessibility requirements change over time. So again, we're now in a space where the website is considered very accessible, and over and above that, because that's the technical side of it, because we've now got an accessibility working group rolling things out, the material on the website as well is more accessible. So it's written in formats where a wider range of people can understand the work that we do.
So it would take in visually impaired and BSL and translation, presumably?
Yes, BSL is the work that the group is doing at the moment. So they're just in the course of producing a new BSL plan. We're having a chat with fellow office holders about that, because we think we could pool resource there. Because some of our functions are shared. So if you're a BSL user and you want to make a freedom of information request, I don't think it matters necessarily whether you want to make that of me or the Ombudsman, or So that's why we're talking together about.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. Just one thing I forgot to ask when we talked about recruitment, just for context, how many staff do you have?
19.
19?
19, yeah.
Did you say, sorry, 19 or 90?
19.
19?
19.
19,
yes,
sorry.
Yes, goodness me.
That's, yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks,
Not at all.
Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Rona. I'll pass over to you, Joe.
Thanks very much. I want to ask a bit about complaints in in the round, specifically looking maybe at MSP complaints.
Sure.
A significant reduction in this reporting period. I think 98 MSP complaints in this reporting period compared to 572 in 2022-23. Anything you can say about why that's come about?
I think you may be talking about live complaints, because the 2022-23 year, there were quite a few carried forward.
Okay.
And that all relates back to what we called the super complaint at the office. I think it's now in a footnote in the annual report and accounts. But basically, and I did describe this, I think, as a blip the last time I was in front of the committee. There were some activities going on in the Parliament, and I'm really not permitted to go into detail because of what the Act precludes me talking about. But there were some activities going on in the Parliament that generated an awful lot of unhappiness from members of the public. And that's why there were so many complaints. And it was all in a single year, and it was all over a sort of 4-month period. And because there were so many complaints, because they were multifaceted, and because there were so many people that we required to interview and obtain material from, it took a long time to investigate. It was a blip, though. I think that's behind us, and complaint numbers are now lower. And I checked before coming to see the committee today, because I felt it was likely to be of interest. In this year, lower again. So I don't think we've got a particular problem with MSP complaints and conduct. Far and away, the majority of my business does come from the sort of local authority councillor side of things.
So it's generally now stable, would you say?
Yes.
And there was one particular thing. So,
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of the complaints that are coming through, is there any suggestion that election cycles and those kind of things increase the number of complaints that you receive and have to deal with?
I think anecdotally they do. I'm still very keen to conduct research in this, and it is included in my business plan. My particular priority, as the committee will be aware, so I was running with a backlog of complaints because I had so few staff to deal with them. It's not a backlog anymore. We're just talking about a queue now, but reducing waiting times to a level that's acceptable to me, and I think stakeholders is my #1 priority. Once we've got a wee bit of spare capacity, we are going to do some more research. But anecdotally, yes, I do think the election cycle has an impact. The SPCB, the last time I met them, which was relatively recently, towards the end of last year, had expressed an interest in trends. So we were able to put together some statistics for them on complaint numbers over the last 10 years. If it's of interest to the committee, I'd be more than happy to provide it. But in general terms, the trend is upwards. And the trend is also an increase in discourtesy and disrespect type complaints.
So in terms of managing those complaints, you've said there's not a backlog, so that's
yes.
good. But obviously, anyone that's making the complaint,
yeah.
they obviously have an interest in seeing that complaint seen through, so they get a resolution to it. But anyone who's being complained against also has an interest in having what sometimes folk would feel as an unfair complaint,
yeah.
sometimes a vexatious complaint, being resolved. And so I guess what confidence we have, based on the numbers of complaints that in this year that you're seeing, that folk won't be having to wait excessively long times to
yes.
have a resolution one way or the other.
Absolutely. We've introduced 3 measures to address that quite specifically. So again, all based on the strategic plan, but trickle down to the business plan. Reducing waiting times is an absolute priority. I said as much to the committee last year, and it remains the case. The reality is, though, we've got no control over fluctuating complaint numbers, and there's been a big rise this year. Big rise. And so, we've been up against it. But equally, I've got additional resource in, and that has made a difference. And Audit Scotland identified the same thing. It is making a difference. We've got a complaint allocation plan in place now. And that means that we've got even distribution of cases and case types across the entire team. We've got a duty investigating officer in place now. and they've got a formal role in triaging all incoming complaints. So where it's, for example, a service complaint that's really nothing to do with us, you know, a councillor hasn't responded to my emails, or an MSP isn't doing what I want them to do as their constituent, those are triaged and dismissed as quickly as possible, so almost straight away. What that leaves us with are the ones that do require investigation. So over and above those two measures, and I won't go into all the detail with them, but we've also now dedicated much more additional resource to the initial assessment stage. It means that I'm basically presenting at more hearings, but the two most senior members of the team in the office took on everything that was in the queue, so everything that was waiting to be assessed, and they've gone through all of those, and they're conducting the initial assessments on them, and then passing the ones requiring investigation to team members, and ensuring that the ones that are requiring dismissal are dismissed as quickly as possible. So what that means, the net effect of that, is that the oldest complaints waiting in a queue for assessment at this point in time are from December, and you know, we're into January. So by this year end, I would say waiting times will be at a level that I would hope would be acceptable to everyone, regardless of whether they're a complainer, a respondent, or anyone else for that matter.
Okay, thank you. One last area I have a particular interest in the work around the lobbying legislation, as the Minister took that through the Parliament in collaboration with this committee. I see there was just one complaint regarding failure to comply with the register, and that was inadmissible. Is that because folk now understand the legislation and are complying, or is it because folk don't understand the legislation and are not complaining?
Oh. That's a good question. And to be honest with you, I don't know, because I receive so few complaints about lobbying, it would be probably inappropriate for me to reach a conclusion. My understanding is that that's a review of the lobbying legislation is probably slated for the next session, and I understand that the Scottish Parliament's Information Centre has done a bit of research in this area, which doubtless the committee will find very, very helpful. So
this committee is doing some work in that area. To look at it. So your comments are, I think, helpful to that.
I'd love to be able to, you know, give you a substantive answer.
Maybe we'll ask you back. But thanks very much.
By all means, sure.
Thank you. A couple of additional ones. Sue, do you want to put in? Then I'll bring Rona in.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much, Ian Bruce. You mentioned about a large number of your complaints are regarding local authority issues, and it won't be unsurprising that I may want to ask you about what's going on here in Edinburgh right now with the leader that has just resigned from the council. It's come to light, and it's been covered in the Herald, that there was complaints going back as far as 2018, and I understand that predates your appointment as Ethical Commissioner, but there's also an allegation that the Ethical Standards Commissioner dismissed the complaint in 2020, September 2020. So I'm wondering if something is of public interest, as it appears to be now, and there's a lot of stones being uncovered, what process or is the possibility of you going back and reviewing what may have happened at that point and opening inquiries into complaints?
Just before the Commissioner answers, obviously, in part this is a live ongoing matter, and there are statutory requirements that the Commissioner is under about what the Commissioner as an individual and as an office can disclose with regard to closed complaints that have been through the process. So
it was more about the process.
In the more generic sense, yes. What opportunities, not even opportunities, what pathways exist to review previous decisions, I think is probably the...
Yes, no, I'm very happy to answer in general terms, so not about a specific case, but in general terms, very happy to. Actually, this is something that's come up in this committee and every subject committee, as well as the Public Audit Committee. So I've been questioned in this area previously, and I did take legal advice on it, so I am in a position to answer this based on legal advice. There's a legal principle at play here, it's called functus officio. So certainly not my intention to baffled with that, and I'm not a lawyer. I think probably the nearest equivalent legal principle that I can point to, just in terms of aiding with understanding, is double jeopardy. So if someone has been found innocent, for want of a better expression, a case cannot be opened again by a public authority except in very narrow circumstances. So there could be scope for reopening a complaint where, for example, additional evidence comes to light, and I have been able to reopen complaints in such circumstances previously. So it would have to be something like that. If the facts and circumstances were exactly the same as they were when a prior office holder, so my predecessor, closed a complaint, there'd be no scope for me to reopen it. Even if I felt that it was appropriate to reopen it and felt it was in the public interest, and this is why I took legal advice, and this is quite an important point to make, I would, almost certainly be legally challenged, and I would almost certainly lose. So effectively, I'd be using public money to undertake an exercise that I know would result in the loss of public money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Apologies, Convener.
Rona.
Thanks, Convener. It was just really to follow up a wee bit on the process for complaints on elected members. So I wonder what the link is, as I understand it, if someone's complaining about an MSP or
Sure.
me, they write to the presiding officer, and what happens at that point? Do you become involved in that? Does that get passed on? Or if the presiding officer says there's no case to answer, you don't know about it. But if they did, does that get passed on to you?
We don't get referrals from the presiding officer in that sense, and I guess probably what's at play here are people's rights, their information rights. I would guess, based on the types of complaints that we get, that very occasionally the presiding officer will have had to say to someone, this isn't actually something for my office, it's something for the Commissioner to look at.
Okay.
What happens more frequently, though, is people write to me in the first instance with a complaint that's actually for the presiding officer because it's excluded from my remit. And we always let them know.
But if it's a case of, my MSP didn't answer my emails,
Sure.
and you had proof that you did and things like that, and it was so they would go to the presiding officer,
Yes.
not to your office.
That's correct. Yeah. There are a range of what are known as excluded complaints within the code itself.
Right.
But we've got an extensive database of organisations that can help you with your complaint if we can't. We always signpost.
Yeah.
We don't just say to people, "Oh, we can't help you." I made the point earlier about what the public needs, and
Public portal, yes, got it.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thanks.
Not at all.
Can I just ask a couple of points of clarification? You've said that in respect of MSP complaints, the current queue waiting for assessment is back to December, but your website, although it is of course
Sure.
talking about October 2024, makes reference to cases that go back to June, August and September. That will change at the end of the next quarter, presumably,
Yes.
to show the figures that you've given today. That's very helpful. And my second of three clarification questions is, in the report, when it comes to dealing with councillor complaints, there's a breakdown of where those complaints come from,
Sure.
because of the interesting discussion about councillors complaining about councillors, public complaining about councillors. But with regard to MSP or complaints to MSPs, that isn't there. Is that just because of the very small number, or is it that there actually isn't that there isn't any interesting information that can be gathered from the sources?
I would suggest probably not much interesting information. From my memory, far and away the majority of complaints about members actually come from the public.
Yes.
It's members
Yes.
of the public. So,
Yes.
but if the committee would find it helpful, I'd be more than happy to provide that sort of breakdown. It's straightforward for us to do.
It was just interesting that
Sure.
it appeared from the councillors, and there was an opinion derived from that evidence about it, which didn't exist for the MSPs.
Sure.
And my final question is something which you will fully expect, because we've discussed this at length, which is regard to the support for people who are complained about. We've had some reference to that already today.
Yep.
And I know that during your tenure, there's already been amendments to clarify and make more clear the obligations that are on individuals who are complained about. Are you getting any further forward, or are you sensing anything about support being available for people who are complained about, other than where we were almost 2 years ago when we discussed this?
I've been asking for it for 3 years. I still think it's important. I still think it's important. It's a bit like having policies in place. You know, you only need to refer to them when things go wrong. But if you've been complained about, or if you've been subject to conduct, or if you've been a witness to conduct, that has an emotional impact.
Yeah.
It genuinely does. And I think the lack of support for people in those situations. So we spoke earlier about barriers to participation in public life. There's one right there. There's one right there. And the question is timely, because we finally, towards the end of last year, did get a response from the Cabinet Secretary in respect of complaints about councillors. And I met with the Standards Commission just before the turn of the year, so I do plan to write to the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee quite soon about this, and I'll happily copy the letter to yourselves from the Cabinet Secretary. I think we need to hand this back really to the committees to look at what government's doing in this area. But basically we've been told that's the responsibility of local authorities and parties. I know the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee's done its own research in this area. You know, it did write to all the political parties and asked them what arrangements were in place. There's no consistent picture. I've looked at all that correspondence. It's patchy. I know from discussions with the monitoring officers that there's no consistent picture in terms of what support local authorities provide. Some do, some don't. But anyway, that's the position of the Scottish ministers, which is really, this is, you know, it's a local issue that needs to be resolved locally. So I'll write the Local Government Committee about that. As far as the Parliament's concerned, my understanding is they set up a working group to look at this, and they come up with some recommendations. And I do think current members do have access to support, but it's the other parties who don't necessarily, unless you're a member of staff or something like that. So I think there's still a lacuna there, and I will persist.
I'm very grateful to hear that.
Sure.
We will assist and also persist.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sue, can I come to you?
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm going to ask some, you mentioned in your opening remarks already about your diversity programme and things that you're looking at doing there in terms of the Code of Practice. And so how is the implementation of that 2022 Code of Practice impacting the fairness and openness of the public appointments process?
I think it's going well. Well, of course I would say that, but I've indicated earlier I don't like to mark my own homework, so we've actually had our internal auditors look at the public appointment side of the office, and their review isn't completed yet, but you know, it was about consistency of our decision making and advice and guidance that we're giving to people. We get very few complaints about public appointments, and you'll have seen from the annual report. So one very significant one came in, and it provided me with a great deal of assurance about the way in which the system is operating, because effectively someone was saying, I think I'm being discriminated against, and it's happened in respect of these 15 appointment rounds. We conducted an extensive investigation into that and found absolutely no evidence to support that allegation. You know, that provides me with a great deal of assurance. It was the most comprehensive investigation we'd ever conducted. It's still bedding in. Some of the changes that we've made, I think, are helping to make a difference. Traditionally, I think the process tended to have been run along tram lines. You know, so if we repeat this process in the same way we always have, it's sort of risk-averse approach to things, it'll be better. But But because we've empowered, I feel, panel chairs to do more on behalf of ministers, they are taking revised approaches and they are bearing fruit. And that's certainly the view of the public appointments advisors who I basically allocate to sit and oversee appointment rounds. In terms of transparency, so we're publishing much more material ourselves now because we've got the additional resource in place. So you'll find on our website things like reports on applicant surveys, so how applicants feel about the fairness of the process, which is obviously very, very important. And also some additional new good practice case studies. So, you know, we are seeing the proliferation of good practice as well.
And there was quite a lot of concern, shall I say, around one appointment which was quite public and it was made quite a noise in here, certainly, and that was the appointment of the Scottish Land Commissioner, if you remember.
Yes.
So, you know, there was concern
Yes.
around the impartiality of that public appointment. So what actions did you and your office and your team take to sort of address that?
How does one put this? I'm going to lapse into the vernacular. We were all over it.
Okay.
I allocated a public appointments advisor to that entire appointment round. And I think this is often misunderstood. I think, you know, perhaps potentially I could do more in terms of awareness raising here, but those public appointments advisors, they are consultants who I contract with. They're on a service level agreement. They're entirely independent of the Scottish Government, entirely independent. And I'm the one who tenders for them. I'm the one who trains them. After this meeting today, I'm going into a meeting with the entire cohort of public appointments advisors, and I am there to keep them right, and they keep me up to date with each and every appointment round that they are allocated to. So I understand why there were concerns, and I understand why, you know, people felt, well, you know, this is politicised somehow, and that is something that I seek to avoid, because what we all need to ensure and need to be assured of is that the best people for those roles are the people who are appointed to them. Now, we run a fit and proper person test, so that's on the face of the code as part of every appointment round, and that includes exploring things like whether or not you've got any unmanageable conflicts of interest. I understand that particular individual advised the panel that they were going to relinquish a particular role they held in order to be considered suitable for the role for which they applied. So that was explored. The panels also explored whether or not their previous conduct was compatible with the role for which they have applied. I do understand that that individual had made some public criticism of fellow politicians, and you know that had been raised as an issue. But to be honest with you, it's not unusual for politicians to criticise fellow politicians on occasion. That's been a talk about conversation earlier today. But you know, whether or not that renders them unsuitable, I think is a different question. So all of that was explored. And the other thing to bear in mind is ministers can only appoint from the pool of people who apply for roles. Our hope and ambition with the Diversity Delivers strategy is to get more people applying for these roles. So
and I will
fishing
come on
in
to
a
that diversity thread. You spoke earlier on about the commissioner landscape and how you, in terms of the evidence you gave to Finance Committee, but do you take a view on the number of public appointees in Scotland in general, and is there a mechanism for you to ensure there's no duplication in some of those public functions? Have you got a role in that at all?
I don't at all. Those things are entirely for the Scottish ministers. My role really is just, and it's also to do with the criteria for selection, which I think is important. I don't determine what a body needs. My people are there just to ensure that once that's been determined by the ministers, the process delivers it.
It's just the 100 public bodies, 770 posts. But
exactly, yes.
So let's going back to the diversity, and you did speak about making sure you have the best people for the roles. So how do you square off that circle then when you've got targets? And I was wondering how you came up with your target percentages that we've got in the briefing here for each of the groups as well.
Sure.
And what role this new organisation, Leading Kind, may have in sort of navigating what can be quite a challenging decision making that you've got to, and given all sorts of factors that link into that. So that's quite vague, but you know what I'm trying to ask.
Sorry, could I trouble you just to repeat your first question?
Yes, okay. It was around, it's all about ensuring that the best people for the roles getting the job. You also mentioned in your previous evidence it's all depending on who actually applies.
Yes.
But then you've got these target percentages of various groups. So how do you square off all those competing factors, and what role will this organisation Leading Kind in helping you navigate through that stormy sea?
Okay. So I ask you to repeat yourself.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
It's actually helped me, to be fair.
Okay. So how do we ensure the best people get the role? I don't want to get overly technical about this, but our public appointments advisors, that they all have backgrounds in recruitment and selection. That's their area of expertise, but with a particular focus on diversity and inclusion. So that's the basis on which we tender for them, and they're there to give advice. I also provide advice and guidance as an office to officials who are tasked with filling these roles. The ministers determine in general terms what they require at the outset of an open competition. So that's skills, knowledge, experience, other relevant attributes, and that can be things like geographical location, lived experience, you name it. And the code, this version of the code is much, much clearer about the range of things that ministers can consider when they're looking to fill posts. So that's the minister's responsibility. The panel is then tasked with basically putting together a very clear person specification, and it is very clear, it's very specific. And then over and above that, they're also tasked with designing a range of what we call indicators. And in HR circles, they're also known as BARS, so behaviourally anchored rating scales. But the indicators, what they do is they explain in very, very clear terms, in order to meet this criterion for selection, this is what good looks like. There are usually sort of 5 to 6 of those. So people, when they apply for the role, know that they need to meet that criterion, and that in order to demonstrate their merit, that they need to be able to basically meet, as many as possible of those indicators. And that's how the panel assesses them. And the panel assesses each and every candidate against each and every criterion using a range of methods. So there's usually an initial written application, but the code's not prescriptive about what that is. It can be a form, it can be a letter, it can be a statement of intent, but the entire process has to be designed to assess all of the criteria for selection. So that's how the most able people are identified. And there are different scoring systems in place, etc. But basically, that's how the most able people are identified. Turning to target percentages, those were come up with in 2008. So when we consulted on the last Diversity Deliver strategy, we agreed those targets with the Scottish ministers. They've been in place since that point in time, and they were based on Scotland's demographics at that point in time. Yes, which is why we include the demographic data, so you can make, and everyone can make that comparison. Leading Kind. So I'd be more than happy, again, if the committee's interested in this, to provide the tender documentation which set out what we expected of any consultant coming into this space to be able to deliver, and the abilities that they had, and they needed to demonstrate to our satisfaction so that we knew that they were going to be able to deliver against what we required. And all the detail is in there. So it was an extensive tendering process. We had some really impressive organisations and individuals come forward for that work, and we're delighted with the result that we got. If you'd like to find out in person how exactly they intend to deliver, then I hope that you and your fellow members will invite them into the Parliament and have an opportunity to have a chat with them about how they intend to deliver, but also what you think they should be doing, because we really do want to know that.
Thank you. That's an opportunity the convener will no doubt we'll discuss that later. Thank you very much.
Good.
Mr. Bruce.
Thank you, Sue. And again, thank you. Ian, for coming and facing the questions for the report. You know, over the period of time that I've had the privilege of sitting at this end of the table, there has been a sea change in the report, the contents of the report, the confidence that both external stakeholders and indeed internal staff have had in relation to that. And I want to thank you and your staff for it. And I just really want to steal your words by reiterating the final part of your report, because it is a privilege to lead the team that you do. And I do think that we can see a talented and dedicated group of professionals. And I think your very last sentence about saying that we know that day in, day out, our work makes a difference to people's lives and we don't take that responsibility lightly is a very powerful statement for a lot of people, both within but also without your organisation. So can I thank you for your attendance today, and I will move on to the next agenda item. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah, I'm going to suspend very briefly to allow the changeover. Excellent. Can I welcome people back? And this is agenda item 3. And it is for the committee to consider an application for the recognition of a proposed cross-party group on France. And we are joined by the proposed convener of the proposed group, Daniel Johnson, MSP. Can I invite Daniel Johnson to set out the background to the establishment of the group, the purposes and issues the group intends to address. And then I hope you're happy to take questions from the committee.
Alors, bonjour, je suis très heureux d'être ici, but I'll do the rest in English because I'm assuming that would suit the committee. As you may have sort of gathered by my sort of attempt at French at the beginning, the key kind of premise for this is I am kind of a lifelong francophone. And more broadly, and I think thinking about cross-party groups in this place and the activities we undertake and the global context we're in, I think we really need to think about our outreach and our relationships with other parts of the world, particularly as the globe faces points of political crisis. And actually, you know, some of these challenges that we see faced around the world are in France. I think France in particular, I think, is worthy of attention and engagement by the Scottish Parliament. There are, of course, the historic links that France is Scotland's oldest ally, a relationship and an alliance that goes back hundreds of years. But more importantly, there are actually very substantial economic links that Scotland enjoys with France. France is the 5th largest destination for outbound exports from Scotland. It is also, Scotland is a geography that has attracted significant French capital. There are 160 French-owned companies generating more than £8 billion in turnover that have invested in Scotland. Just by way of example, Chivas represents 25% of Pernod Ricard's globally invested capital. We also have very significant investments in offshore renewables and other parts of the energy sector by EDF, and I know the convener will be interested in their investments. Perhaps most recently, we've seen the investment by Vinci in Edinburgh Airport. So I think for those historic reasons and also the economic reasons, I think there's good reason to have a forum in this place that looks at our relationship with France, looks at how we can build those cultural relationships, how we can build understandings, and also, if you kind of look at my other cross-party group memberships, I think I'm particularly interested in how we can use cross-party groups actually as a vehicle to host people from other geographies with interests in Scotland. And then the final point is a more cultural one. I personally am very concerned about the numbers of young people taking modern languages qualifications in schools. I'm kind of interested in how we can improve cultural awareness and actually encourage people to learn French. French, for a long time in our history, was the primary language people learned in schools, and I think we should try and encourage people to pick up French at any point in their life. And in fact, I just bumped into a colleague who told me that they go every Tuesday evening to do French language classes at the consulate that is just up on the high street. So perhaps that's the sort of thing that we can encourage other members to do as well. But with that, I will stop. I'm very happy to answer questions from members.
I'm very grateful, Daniel. I'll go to Rona Mackay first. Rona.
Thank you, convener. Morning, Daniel. First of all, let me say I love France, and I completely agree with you about the language teaching in schools. But I'm going to ask you a bit of a cheeky question.
Of course.
It's okay. Do you think there are too many cross-party groups?
Yes.
Okay.
I do. But I think we need to kind of refocus on what we want them to do. And I think we should also be looking at how we can encourage cross-party groups to work together. So actually one of the things that we discussed at the inaugural meeting that we held was actually, if this is going to work, I think that we need to probably think about how we work with the other cross-party groups, particularly the ones with a European focus. And I think that might be a more fruitful way of working. But I think there are too many. But I actually think, given the geopolitics, I think it is important that we have country-based ones. I think if you look, there is a pattern. I don't want to call out what it is, but there is a pattern in terms of the types of cross-party groups that we have. But I think they are, I think the geographic ones are useful forums for actually trying to encourage a bit of exchange and do a useful bit of work. And I think it's important that we do that at this point in time.
So would you think that, you mentioned the overlap between Europe and yourself. I mean, do you think a merger would be preferable, or would you rather keep the focus purely on France?
I would like to get this up and running. I think establish that its viability, but I think, as we're very close to the next parliamentary election, as I think we kind of look to what it might seek to do in the next parliamentary session, and whoever may be here to take it forward, I think relationships and maybe joint meetings may be something that's fruitful.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Kavir.
Can I go over to Sue?
Thank you very much, Kavir. And yes, Daniel Johnson, picking up on that thread, you said you wanted to maybe establish its viability and do work at this point in time.
Yeah.
But we don't have that much time left, and in fact standing orders have got a line in the sand of March for the establishment of new CPGs. So what realistically can you expect to achieve in the time that's left, given the obligations for formal meetings and those sorts of activities?
I think we can expect to have at least 3 or 4 formal meetings before the next Parliament. I think that gives us a good opportunity to actually help shape some of the discussions that lead up to that election. I think matters of economic growth, investment, I think geopolitics are really very apposite at this time. So I think that there is time to do things. I think there is time to have those meetings, and I think those meetings can be useful and substantive.
Okay.
Thanks very much. I get why you think there should be a cross-party group specifically for different countries. I understand that. One of my concerns around that would be if there was seen, if cross-party groups on countries were seen to be effectively an arm of a government of any sort. Now, I see within your purposes, you don't talk about the French government, you talk about the Assemblée Nationale and the Senate, and I think that feels appropriate. But just what protections can we have to make sure this is about culture and political, but not government?
Look, I mean, I think it's a really good point, and a member of other cross-party groups, the country focus, and I think you have to have a relationship with those governments. I think that the Consul General, if they have one, is invited, but they are not a member. They're not the Secretariat, and I think that's the difference. They're invited to input, absolutely, but they don't determine the agenda. So I think that's the sort of the distinction I draw. I think the other thing, just on that point though, with France, which is interesting, is that, and I think you're right to point to we're looking at essentially looking towards the sort of parliamentary relationships. I think with France also there's the interesting point around the subnational level, which France 40 years ago embarked on a quite radical process of devolution. It was a very, very centralised unitary state. And actually, I think there were lessons from the French regions, both historically, but also most recently, for example, with the creation of the unitary authority in Lyon, that we could learn from as well. So I think that those administrative links, the parliamentary links, but I think understanding the difference between government and those institutional links, I think, is important.
Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions in relation to the actual proposed group. And the first is in respect of the proposed secretariat, who would be an individual, is my understanding. Is that right, rather than any role that they might have in a professional capacity?
Yes, so I mean, this is very much driven by that individual and his eagerness to see that, and I was very happy to accommodate that. I think elsewhere in the paperwork, he alludes to kind of relationships with the Franco-Scottish Society. I mean, I think we will need to look at how the Secretariat works going forward. And again, having borne the scars of other cross-party groups, that is the critical link. And we'll just need to, I think, reflect on that. I think quite early on. If he has capacity, that is fantastic. But I think very often it's the Secretariat is best when it's borne by an organisation.
Which brings me to my second and possibly slightly more challenging question, because as proposed convener of this group, you would have the responsibility to ensure compliance with the rules that are set out. And we have had a number of cross-party groups that have been very challenged by the rules in this session, including indeed one of your own with regards to the USA. Can you assure us that you have the capacity as an individual MSP and within your office, Daniel Johnson, to meet the obligations of the existing CPGs that you're attached with, but to take on this new CPG as well, because the responsibility rests with MSPs personally?
Sure. So my remarks about the Secretariat are kind of borne by kind of what we attempted with the cross-party group with the USA, and that which frankly didn't work. And I think it is really important that an organisation takes that forward. But look, I mean, I think we'd say very frankly to the committee, my experience with the cross-party groups. So, for example, I did not seek to reconstitute the cross-party group on social sciences from the last parliamentary session. I don't think there's any harm in looking whether there's appetite, establishing an agenda. But I think if there isn't an appetite, there is no harm in winding up cross-party groups or not continuing them into new parliamentary sessions. And I will be very comfortable if that's the case with this. But I think, I think there are good reasons to explore whether there is appetite. I think actually the window of time we have before the election will allow us to establish that, and then we will take a view.
Okay. Rona, would you like to come back? No, please do. No, please do.
Just
Yeah.
Just a very brief one. I'm just intrigued to see one of the deputy conveners listed as honorary, Stephanie Paye. I haven't seen that before. I'll look into the convener. That's acceptable, is it? Obviously not an elected member.
Not elected as yet.
But that's fine.
The responsibility rests with the MSPs.
Yeah.
The obligations rest with the MSPs here, and the structure within is very much up to how they do it.
That's fine. I just haven't seen that.
No,
before.
that's,
Thank you.
that's helpful. Certainly music to my ears about winding up CPGs, which is appropriate. Daniel Johnson, can I thank you for attending? We will consider the application at the next agenda item, and the clerks will contact you in the normal way. But can I thank you for your attendance today?
Merci beaucoup et à bientôt.
Oh, and I look forward to the translation for the official record. Très bien. Our next agenda item is to consider the application for the proposed cross-party group on France and to decide whether to accord recognition to the proposed groups. I'll just open it up for contributions. Anyone? Joe, if you'd like to kick off.
I'm satisfied with his responses. Clearly, we have an inquiry ongoing to look at cross-party groups in the round. I don't think we should be applying future rules to this application. So I would say I would agree to this cross-party group being formed.
Content? Sue, do you want?
I'm probably a little bit not on that same page. I just feel when we spoke of the overlap that was existing already, even some of the groups, whether it be EDF, Fancy, there's a whole lot of other opportunities for those organisations in that arena to work with other cross-party groups. And it's just the timing and the closeness to our red line. I'm concerned that there's to be substantive. And you spoke a lot about more making it viable for the next session, which I'm just, sorry, not on a place where I can support it.
Fair comment. Rona, any?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement really with my colleague Joe Fitzpatrick. I was satisfied by, I think he's been realistic in what he said, satisfied by his answers, and I, on reflection, think that since Brexit it's very important that we keep relations with other European countries, and France is a very important one. So yes, I'm content for it to go ahead.
And certainly, I think I would echo that view. I think I'm satisfied that he has an understanding of the obligations, which are those technically not part of the recognition of the CPG. We have, as a committee, expressed significant concerns about workloads for MSPs, and I think his very frank comments about the Secretariat were helpful in actually looking at the proposal for this cross-party group. I'm inclined, had this been in the early months of the first session, I could see absolutely no problem for it, and I see a benefit in it, although I do think, again, and I think that speaks to your point, Sue, I think when we come to our inquiry, there is perhaps a recognition that needs to be made about what the cut-off date for CPGs are. So in that mind, are we inclined to consent, or Sue, do you want to make it more formal than that?
I would like to make it more formal.
You would make it more formal than that? All right. Well, I'm content to put it to a vote, which means we have the excitement of, I will go down the line with either for, against, or abstain. And Rona, because of the role that you fulfil as substitute for the member that you fulfil for, I hope you don't mind if I come to you first. Rona, are you for or against?
I'm for. I'm for.
Joe, are you for or against?
For.
And Sue, are you for or against?
Against.
And I will indicate I am for. So the results are 3 members are for, 1 is against, and there are no abstentions. So in this circumstances, recognition of the cross-party group on France is made. Thank you. Our next agenda item is in respect of petition PE 1949, which was a request to review the rules concerning dual mandate MSPs. The committee has previously agreed to consider this petition as part of its scrutiny on the Scottish Elections Representation and Reform Bill. The committee included the issue as part of its scrutiny of the bill at stage 1, and members will also be aware that amendments relating to the ending of dual mandates were considered at stage 2 and 3 of the bill. Amendments were agreed by the Parliament at stage 3, which requires Scottish ministers to lay regulations to give effect to disqualification of members of the House of Commons and members of the House of Lords, and a discretionary power to make regulations to give effect to disqualification of local authority councillors. The Minister for Parliamentary Business committed to undertake a consultation and to report to the Parliament once the consultation is concluded. The Minister has indicated that he is, quote, committed to ensuring that by autumn 2025, regulations are laid as informed by the consultation, which I have committed to publish, and that those regulations are in place well ahead of and effective by the Scottish Parliament election that is scheduled for May 2026. Under the circumstances, it would appear that the petitioner's request in the form of the petition has indeed been answered. And the committee may wish to note that with discussions with the petitioner has indicated that he is content with the outcome that his petition has reached. We need to discuss whether or not we formally close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders on the basis that the aims of the petition have been achieved through the Scottish Elections Representation and Reform Bill as now passed. Are we content to close the petition on those grounds? And is the committee content for me to write to the petitioner confirming the committee's decision? Yes. Excellent. And it is nice to see a petition achieve its aims. I will now move this meeting into private.